Captain Hyun stared at the communication panel with tears in his large, dark eyes. The Vellani captain had never felt so helpless in his entire life. Around him, the bridge of the diplomatic vessel Peaceful Dawn buzzed with quiet activity as his crew worked to boost their transmission signal across the galaxy. The Vellani were a peaceful people. Their homeworld of Thesara Prime was a garden paradise where violence was almost unknown. They had evolved from gentle herbivores who solved conflicts through discussion and compromise. War was something they read about in historical texts from other worlds, never something they experienced firsthand. That changed 6 months ago when the Korthak Empire arrived. The Korthak were everything the Vellani were not. They were massive, aggressive creatures with thick armor plating and razor-sharp claws. They conquered worlds not because they needed resources, but because they enjoyed the act of conquest itself. To the Korthak, war was sport and weaker species were entertainment. When they found Thesara Prime, they saw easy prey. The invasion had been swift and brutal. Korthak warships descended from the sky like metal storms, their weapons turning Vellani cities into burning ruins. The peaceful Vellani had no military to speak of, only a small defense force meant to protect against natural disasters and accidents. Against the Korthak war machine, they might as well have thrown flowers. Now 3 million Vellani were dead. Entire cities had been reduced to ash. The survivors huddled in underground shelters, slowly starving as Korthak hunting parties roamed the surface, killing anyone they found for sport. Captain Hyun wiped his eyes and focused on the message he was preparing to send across known space. It was their last hope. The Vellani Council had authorized him to offer everything they had to any species willing to help them. Their art, their technology, their entire civilization's wealth. All of it would go to whoever could stop the Korthak. Signal. "Strength at maximum, Captain," reported his communication officer, a young female named Leah. Her voice shook with barely controlled fear. Everyone on the ship knew this was their final chance. "Begin transmission," Hyun ordered. The message was simple and desperate. It contained basic information about their species, their location, and their situation, but the core of it was a plea that came from the heart of every surviving Vellani. "This is Captain Hyun of the Vellani Republic, broadcasting on all frequencies. Our people are dying. The Korthak Empire has invaded our homeworld and is systematically destroying our civilization. We are a peaceful people with no knowledge of war. We cannot defend ourselves against their aggression. We are prepared to offer everything we possess to any species willing to send military aid. Our scientific databases, our cultural treasures, our planetary resources, all of it belongs to whoever can help us survive. We do not ask for conquest or occupation. We ask only for peacekeepers to stop the killing. Our children are dying. Our elders are dying. In weeks, perhaps days, there will be no Vellani left alive. If anyone in the galaxy believes that peaceful species deserve to exist, please help us. We will pay any price for the chance to live." The transmission repeated every few minutes as it spread across the galaxy through subspace communication networks. Captain Hyun and his crew waited, watching their screens for any response. Hours passed, then days. The first responses came from nearby systems. A trading consortium offered medical supplies but no military support. A mining corporation proposed to evacuate a few thousand Vellani in exchange for mining rights to their homeworld. A religious order promised prayers and moral support. None offered to fight the Korthak. "Sir," Leah reported after the third day of waiting, "we're receiving responses from the major galactic powers." Hyun's heart jumped with hope. Surely the great civilizations of the galaxy would not let an entire peaceful species be destroyed. The Altaran Federation sent regrets but explained they were in a border dispute and could not spare ships. The Zephyrian Commonwealth offered refugee status to 500 Vellani leaders, but made it clear they would not engage the Korthak military. The Crystalline Collective simply stated that they did not involve themselves in biological conflicts. One by one, the great powers of the galaxy found reasons to refuse. The Korthak Empire was too dangerous, too well-armed, too aggressive. No one wanted to risk war with them to save a species of pacifists from a minor world. Captain Hyun felt his hope dying with each refusal. The Vellani had always believed that goodness existed in the galaxy, that civilized species would help each other in times of need. They were learning that civilized species could be very practical when it came to their own survival. On the fifth day, as Hyun prepared to send a final, more desperate message, something unexpected happened. "Captain," Leah called out, her voice filled with confusion. "I'm detecting a massive hyperspace signature. Something big is coming out of jump space." Hyun looked at his sensors and gasped. The energy signature was enormous, far larger than any single ship he had ever seen. For a moment, he feared it might be a Korthak reinforcement fleet coming to finish what they had started. Then the ship emerged from hyperspace. It was unlike anything in Vellani records. The vessel was massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest Korthak battleship. Its hull was a dark gray metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Weapon ports lined its sides like teeth in a predator's mouth. This was clearly a warship, but not of any design the Vellani recognized. "Sir," Leah whispered, "I'm reading more signatures. Lots more." One by one, warships continued emerging from hyperspace. Dozens of them, then hundreds. They arranged themselves in perfect formation around the massive flagship, creating a fleet that dwarfed anything in recorded galactic history. Captain Hyun stared at his screens in amazement. Who were these people? What species possessed such incredible military power? And why had they come? His communication system chimed with an incoming message. The signal was strong and clear, indicating advanced technology. When he opened the channel, a face appeared on his screen that made him gasp. The being looking back at him was clearly a predator. Its eyes were forward-facing like a hunter's, set in a face that showed both intelligence and determination. The creature's skin was smooth and relatively soft-looking, but Hyun could see the strength in its features. This was a species that had evolved to hunt and kill. "Captain Hyun," the alien said in perfect Vellani language, though with an accent Hyun had never heard before. "This is Admiral Tae of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We received your transmission and have come to assist." Hyun struggled to find words. Earth? He had never heard of such a place, but looking at the enormous fleet surrounding his small ship, he realized it didn't matter where they came from. "Admiral," he finally managed, "we are grateful for any help you can provide. But I must warn you, the Korthak Empire is extremely dangerous. They have conquered dozens of worlds, and their military is—" Admiral Tae held up a hand, stopping him. The human's expression was calm, but there was something in those predator eyes that made Hyun shiver. "Captain," the Admiral said quietly, "where are the Korthak fleets?" Something in the way the human asked the question made Hyun realize that, perhaps for the first time since this nightmare began, the Korthak were the ones who should be afraid. Admiral Tae stood before the massive holographic display in the war room of Earth's Strategic Command Center. The blue glow of the galaxy map cast shadows across her weathered face as she studied the data streaming in from the outer sectors. Around the circular table, the most powerful military leaders of humanity sat in tense discussion. The Vellani transmission had reached Earth just 72 hours ago. In that short time, it had sparked the largest military mobilization in human history. General Wan leaned forward, his fingers dancing across his personal datapad as he calculated logistics. "The supply chain analysis is complete, Admiral. We can sustain a full battle fleet at maximum combat readiness for 8 months without resupply. Longer if we establish forward bases." Commander Su nodded from across the table. "Intelligence reports confirm the Vellani account. The Korthak Empire has 47 star systems under their control. They maintain a standing fleet of approximately 2,000 warships, mostly heavy cruisers and battleships. Their ground forces number in the millions. "What about their technology level?" asked Admiral Tay. "Advanced, but not beyond our capabilities," Sue replied. "Their weapons are energy-based, primarily plasma cannons and particle beams. Their armor is thick, but relies on mass rather than sophisticated materials. They appear to favor overwhelming firepower over tactical flexibility." Dr. Hana, the chief xenobiologist, added her analysis. "From the biological data, the Korthak are evolved predators, but they're ambush hunters, not pursuit predators like humans. They're strong and tough, but they're not built for extended combat. They rely on intimidation and quick decisive strikes." General Wan looked up from his calculations. "The math is straightforward, Admiral. They outgun us in individual ship firepower. They outnumber us in total vessels. On paper, they should win any direct confrontation." Admiral Tay smiled grimly. "Since when have humans ever fought on paper, General?" The room fell silent for a moment. Every person present had grown up learning about humanity's history of warfare. They knew that humans had a peculiar relationship with impossible odds. They tended to take them personally. "There's something else," Dr. Hana said quietly. "The Vellani are herbivores, peaceful to an extreme that's almost unknown in the galaxy. They've never developed military technology because they've never needed it. They're essentially children being slaughtered by wolves." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Commander Sue's jaw tightened visibly. "General." Wan's hands clenched into fists. Admiral Tay's eyes grew cold and hard. Humanity had many traits that made them unique in the galaxy, but perhaps none stronger than their protective instinct toward the innocent. It was a quirk of their evolution as social predators. They had learned to defend their pack, and over time their definition of pack had expanded to include anyone who couldn't defend themselves. "What's our current fleet status?" Admiral Tay asked. "Every ship that can fly is being prepped for deployment," Wan reported. "The 3rd, 5th, and 7th fleets are already at full readiness. The 1st and 2nd fleets will be ready within 18 hours. We're also calling up reserve units and commandeering civilian vessels for supply and support roles. Total numbers? 4,637 combat vessels, another 2,000 support ships, 700,000 Marines, and ground troops, 3 million support personnel." The scale was staggering. Humanity was preparing to deploy over half of their entire military force to help a species they had never met on the other side of the galaxy. "Sir," Commander Sue interjected, "there's been some discussion among the other department heads. Some feel we should send a smaller force first, perhaps a single fleet, to assess the situation before committing to full-scale intervention." Admiral Tay turned to face her subordinate. "Commander, how many Vellani are dying while we assess?" "Current estimates suggest they're losing approximately 50,000 per day to Korthak hunting parties and orbital bombardments." "Then we don't have time for assessment missions," Tay replied flatly. "We go in with everything we have, and we go now." Dr. Hana cleared her throat. "Admiral, there's one more thing the Council needs to consider. The galactic community is watching how we handle this. This will be humanity's first major military action on the galactic stage. How we conduct ourselves will determine how other species view us for generations." "Good," Admiral Tay said. "Let them watch. Let them see what happens when someone threatens the innocent while humans are in the neighborhood." General Wan began reading from his mobilization orders. "Deployment will begin immediately. Admiral Tay will command the joint fleet from the Dreadnought Soul's Fury. All ships are to be loaded with full combat supplies and humanitarian aid packages for refugee assistance. Rules of engagement are..." "Simple," Admiral Tay interrupted. "Any Korthak vessel that fires on human ships or continues attacking Vellani civilians will be destroyed. Any Korthak ground forces engaged in hostile action against non-combatants will be eliminated. We're not going there to negotiate or posture. We're going there to stop a genocide." The room erupted in activity as officers began coordinating the massive undertaking. Ships across human space received emergency deployment orders. Factories switched to round-the-clock production of weapons and supplies. Reserve units were activated and began moving toward staging areas. Within 6 hours, the first wave of ships was departing Earth orbit. The sight was unprecedented in human history. Hundreds of warships moving in perfect formation toward the outer system jump points, their engines burning bright blue against the blackness of space. Captain Dong watched from the observation deck of his engineering vessel as the main battle fleet passed by. He had seen many impressive sights in his career, but nothing like this. The dreadnought Soul's Fury alone was massive enough to serve as a city, its hull bristling with enough weapons to glass a planet. Behind it, wave after wave of cruisers, destroyers, and frigates followed in precise formation. "Sir," his communication officer reported, "Admiral Tay is requesting final fleet status reports. Tell the Admiral that Engineering Corps is ready to build whatever she needs, wherever she needs it," Dong replied, "even if it's in the middle of a firefight." As the fleet approached the jump point, Admiral Tay stood on the bridge of Soul's Fury, looking out at the ships under her command. Each one represented thousands of human lives willing to travel across the galaxy to fight for strangers. It was perhaps the most human thing she had ever witnessed. "Admiral," her navigation officer reported, "all ships report ready for jump. Destination coordinates locked in." "Signal the fleet," Tay ordered. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump. In 3 hours, we'll be in Volani space, and the Korthak are about to learn why Earth is classified as a deathworld." The fleet disappeared into hyperspace in a brilliant flash of light, leaving behind only empty space and the certainty that the galaxy was about to change forever. On a small diplomatic vessel at the edge of Volani space, Captain Hyun watched, his sensors with amazement as hundreds of hyperspace signatures appeared on his screen. Whatever was coming, it was far larger than anything he had dared to hope for. The humans were coming, and they were bringing everything they had. Dr. Hana stepped through the airlock connecting the human shuttle to the Volani diplomatic vessel. Behind her, 2 Marines in dress uniforms carried translation equipment and cultural exchange materials. This was humanity's first formal contact with an alien species, and the weight of that moment was not lost on anyone involved. Captain Hyun waited in the small reception bay, flanked by 3 of his officers. As the airlock cycled open and the humans emerged, Hana could see the Volani captain's eyes widen with what appeared to be fear. She understood why. Humans looked like predators because they were predators. Forward-facing eyes, sharp teeth, strong jaws, and lean, muscular builds all screamed danger to species that had evolved as prey. The Volani, with their large eyes set on the sides of their heads and their gentle, round features, were clearly herbivores who had never needed to hunt anything more dangerous than tree fruit. "Captain Hyun," Dr. Hana said in carefully pronounced Volani, bowing in the manner their cultural database suggested was respectful. "I am Dr. Hana of the Earth Defense Fleet. I come seeking knowledge and understanding between our peoples." Hyun seemed surprised by her formal politeness. "Dr. Hana, welcome aboard the Peaceful Dawn. I confess your appearance is intimidating to my people. We have never encountered predator species who came in peace." "I understand your concern," Hana replied. "My species did evolve as hunters, but we learned long ago that the strong should protect the weak, not prey upon them. We come not as predators, but as guardians." The concept seemed to confuse the Volani captain. Through their cultural exchange over the next several hours, Hana began to understand why. In the galaxy beyond Earth, species fell into simple categories. Predators conquered, prey submitted or died. The idea of a predator species that fought to protect prey was apparently unknown. "Your fleet," Hyun said during their meal together, "it is larger than anything in our historical records. Why would your people send so many ships to help strangers?" Hana paused, trying to find words that would translate properly. In human culture, there is a saying, "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing." We could not sit safely in our homes while children were being murdered. But the cost, Hyun protested. The resources, the risk to your own people. What do you hope to gain from helping us? The question seemed to genuinely puzzle Dr. Hana. Nothing, she said finally. We hope to gain nothing except your survival. Meanwhile, on the bridge of Seoul's Fury, Admiral Tae was meeting with Captain Hyun via holographic communication. The Volani leader had been brought aboard the flagship along with his senior staff for what humans called a tactical briefing. The Volani delegation sat around the holographic display table like frightened children at a war council. The three-dimensional map showing their solar system was covered with red indicators representing Korthak positions and blue indicators showing human fleet deployments. Captain, Admiral Tae began, we need detailed information about Korthak, military capabilities, fleet positions, and ground installations. My officers have prepared a tactical questionnaire. Hyun looked at the display with obvious confusion. Admiral, with respect, should we not first discuss terms, payment, territorial arrangements, post-war agreements? The human admiral stared at him for a long moment. Captain, the only terms that matter are these. Where are the Korthak forces, and how quickly can we remove them from your homeworld? But surely you require some form of compensation for your assistance, one of Hyun's officers interjected. Military intervention on this scale must cost enormous resources. Commander Su leaned forward from her position at the tactical display. Captain Hyun, let me ask you something. If you saw a child being attacked by wolves, would you stop to negotiate payment before helping? Of course not, Hyun replied immediately. Any decent being would help without question. Then you understand our position, Admiral Tae said simply. Now, about those Korthak positions. What followed was perhaps the most one-sided military briefing in galactic history. The Volani provided detailed information about every Korthak, ship, base, and troop concentration they were aware of. The humans absorbed this data with frightening efficiency, their computers building attack plans faster than the Volani could provide information. Dr. Hana observed the proceedings with growing fascination. The cultural differences between humans and Volani were stark, but there was something beautiful about watching two species who had never met before working together toward a common goal. Dr. Hana, Captain Hyun approached her during a break in the briefing. May I ask you something about human psychology? Of course. Your people, they are clearly evolved predators. Your Admiral Tae has eyes like a hunting bird, sharp and calculating. Your Marines move like stalking cats, yet you speak of protection and guardianship. How do we know you will not simply replace the Korthak as our conquerors? It was a fair question, and Hana had been expecting it. Captain, may I show you something? She activated her personal communicator and displayed a series of images from Earth. Children playing in parks under the watchful eyes of adults. Elderly people being cared for in comfortable homes. Wildlife preserves where dangerous predators were protected by human rangers. Cities designed around parks and green spaces where all forms of life could thrive. These are scenes from our homeworld, Hana explained. Humans are predators, yes, but we learned that true strength comes not from killing, but from protecting. We hunt those who threaten the innocent. We stalk those who would harm the defenseless. And we kill without mercy those who prey upon the weak. Hyun studied the images with growing amazement. This is unprecedented in our galactic databases. Predator species protecting others rather than exploiting them. Perhaps, Hana suggested. Gently, your galactic databases have never encountered humans before. Back on the bridge, Admiral Tae was reviewing the intelligence gathered from the Volani briefing. The Korthak had 47 ships in the system, ranging from light cruisers to heavy battleships. They had established orbital bombardment platforms around Thessera Prime and had landed approximately 100,000 ground troops across the planet's surface. "Assessment, Commander?" Tay asked. Commander Sue studied the tactical display. Numerically, they're outgunned 4-1, but they have the advantage of prepared positions, and they know the terrain. A conventional assault would be costly. Who said anything about conventional? Admiral Tay asked with a smile that would have terrified any Korthak who saw it. General Wan joined the conversation from his position at the troop deployment station. Ground forces report ready for immediate deployment. The Marines are particularly eager to engage, Admiral. They've been reviewing footage of Korthak atrocities against Volani civilians. Good, Tay replied. Nothing motivates human soldiers quite like righteous anger. Captain Hyun observed the human military planning with a mixture of awe and terror. These beings were clearly deadly, but their deadliness was focused outward toward his people's enemies. For the first time since the Korthak invasion began, he allowed himself to feel hope. "Admiral," he said quietly, "there is something else you should know. The Korthak have been broadcasting messages to the galaxy, claiming that Thessera Prime is now part of their empire. They've warned all other species to stay away or face retaliation." Admiral Tay looked at him with those sharp predator eyes. "Captain, has anyone in the galaxy ever bothered to warn the Korthak about humans?" "No, Admiral. I don't believe they know Earth exists." The human's smile grew wider and somehow more frightening. "Then they're about to get a very educational experience." As the briefing concluded and the Volani delegation prepared to return to their ship, Dr. Hana made one final observation to Captain Hyun. "Your people asked for peacekeepers," she said. "I want you to understand something important. Humans don't keep peace by standing between armies and asking everyone to be reasonable. We keep peace by making sure that anyone who threatens the innocent is too dead to be a problem." Captain Hyun nodded slowly. "I am beginning to understand that your species has a very different definition of peacekeeping than most." "Yes," Dr. Hana agreed. "We do." Warlord Grex stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Blood Harvester, studying the sensor readings with growing irritation. The massive Korthak commander was nearly 3 meters tall, his thick armored hide scarred from countless battles. His yellow eyes glowed with predatory intelligence as he examined the tactical display. "Report!" he growled to his sensor operator. "Warlord, we have detected a large fleet at the edge of the system, approximately 4,000 vessels of unknown configuration. They appeared from hyperspace 3 hours ago and have maintained position just outside weapon range." Grex snorted with contempt. "Another species sending peacekeepers to interfere with our conquest. What pathetic prey have come? To beg for the Volani this time?" His intelligence officer, a smaller Korthak named Vex, approached with a data pad. "Warlord, we have intercepted communications from the fleet. They identify themselves as humans from a world called Earth. Our databases have no record of this species or their homeworld." "Humans," Grex repeated, tasting the word. "Never heard of them. Are they another herbivore species like the Volani?" "Unknown, Warlord, but their fleet configuration suggests military origin. These are warships, not civilian vessels." Grex laughed, a sound like grinding stone. 4,000 ships sounds impressive until you realize they're probably filled with pacifist diplomats who think they can stop the Korthak Empire with strongly worded letters and trade sanctions. The Korthak had seen this before. When they conquered a world, other species would sometimes send token forces to negotiate or establish humanitarian corridors. These interventions were usually small, cautious affairs led by politicians who were more concerned with looking good to their own people than actually helping anyone. "Warlord," his communication officer reported, "the human fleet is requesting permission to send a diplomatic vessel to discuss terms." "Terms?" Grex's laughter boomed across the bridge. "What terms? The Volani belong to us now. Their world belongs to us. Tell these humans they have 1 hour to leave our territory, or we will add their ships to our trophy collection. Sir, should we not at least speak with them? Their fleet is quite large. Grex backhanded the officer, sending him sprawling across the deck. Are you questioning my judgment? The Korthak Empire does not negotiate with weaklings. Send them our standard message. Submit or be destroyed. What Warlord Grex didn't understand was that humans had a very different approach to diplomacy than most galactic species. When humans sent a diplomatic vessel, it wasn't to beg or negotiate. It was to give the enemy one last chance to surrender. Before the shooting started, the human diplomatic ship Olive Branch approached the Korthak fleet slowly, broadcasting peaceful intentions on all frequencies. Aboard the vessel, Ambassador Jin and her staff prepared for what they hoped would be a brief conversation, followed by Korthak withdrawal from Volani space. Ambassador Jin was a veteran diplomat who had spent her career resolving conflicts between human colonies. She was patient, logical, and skilled at finding common ground between opposing sides. She was also completely unprepared for dealing with a species that viewed diplomacy as a sign of weakness. Korthak vessel, this is Ambassador Jin of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, she broadcast as her ship entered the Korthak fleet formation. We come seeking peaceful resolution to the conflict on Thesara Prime. We are prepared to discuss terms for the immediate cessation of hostilities against the Volani people. The response came in the form of plasma cannon fire. The first blast struck the Olive Branch amidships, ripping through her diplomatic shields like paper. The second and third shots destroyed her engines and life support systems. Within seconds, what had been a peaceful diplomatic mission became a funeral pyre drifting in space. 47 human diplomats died instantly. Another 200 crew members were killed when the ship's reactor went critical. A few dozen survivors managed to reach escape pods before the vessel broke apart completely. On the bridge of Sol's Fury, Admiral Tay watched the destruction of the diplomatic ship with cold fury. Around her, the bridge crew stood in stunned silence as debris from the Olive Branch scattered across their screens. Confirm casualties, she ordered, her voice deadly quiet. All diplomatic staff confirmed. Dead, Admiral, reported her communication officer. We're picking up 17 escape pods. Estimated 250 survivors out of 320 aboard. Signal the fleet, Admiral Tay commanded. The Korthak Empire has just declared war on humanity. All ships are to assume battle stations immediately. Across the massive human fleet, red alert klaxons began sounding. Weapon systems that had been powered down came online with ominous hums. Shield generators spun up to full power. Thousands of fighter craft launched from carrier bays and took up attack formations. General Wan appeared on the main communication screen from his command ship. Admiral, ground forces are ready for immediate deployment. The Marines are requesting permission to proceed with orbital assault. Denied, Admiral Tay replied. First, we remove their fleet. Then we remove their ground forces. Then we remove them from existence. Commander Sue approached with tactical data. Admiral, intelligence analysis suggests the Korthak attacked our diplomatic vessel as a show of force. They likely expect us to withdraw now that they've demonstrated their willingness to use violence. Admiral Tay's smile was colder than the vacuum of space. Commander, send a message to Warlord Grex. Tell him that the Korthak Empire has just made the last mistake it will ever make. Aboard the Blood Harvester, Warlord Grex received the human response with amusement. The message was brief and to the point. You killed our diplomats. Now you die. These humans are even more primitive than I thought, Grex told his officers. They think they can intimidate the Korthak Empire with threats. But even as he spoke, his sensor operator was reporting something that made no sense. Warlord, the human fleet is advancing. All 4,000 ships are moving toward our position in attack formation. All of them? Grex asked, suddenly less amused. Are you certain? Yes, Warlord. And sir, They're accelerating past normal tactical speeds. They appear to be conducting a full-scale assault. Grex stared at his tactical display with growing unease. In his experience, alien fleets that suffered casualties typically withdrew to consider their options. They certainly didn't respond to the loss of a single ship by throwing their entire force into immediate attack. "What's their weapons range?" he asked. "Unknown, Warlord. They're maintaining radio silence and their targeting systems are unlike anything in our databases." For the first time since the battle began, Warlord Grex felt a touch of uncertainty. The human fleet was approaching with a level of coordinated aggression he had never seen before. Their ships moved with predatory precision, like a pack of hunters converging on prey. "Sir," his communication officer reported nervously, "the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies. Put it through." Admiral Tay's voice filled the bridge of the blood harvester, calm and controlled despite the circumstances. "Warlord Grex, I am Admiral Tay of the United Earth Defense Fleet. You have attacked a vessel flying under a flag of truce and murdered unarmed diplomats. By the laws of war, your empire has forfeited any right to mercy or quarter." Grex activated his own communication system. "Human Admiral, you are outgunned and outnumbered in our territory. Withdraw now or we will destroy your entire fleet." "Warlord," Admiral Tay replied, "you should have researched human history before. You decided to start a war with us. We have a saying on Earth, don't start fights you can't finish." "We outnumber you 47 ships to your 4,000, Grex snarled. "Those odds strongly favor us." There was a pause before Admiral Tay responded. And when she did, Grex could hear something in her voice that made his blood run cold. "Warlord, those aren't odds. That's a target-rich environment." The human fleet opened fire simultaneously. 4,000 ships, unleashing everything they had at once. The space around Thesara Prime lit up like a newborn star as humanity's response to the murder of their diplomats began in earnest. Warlord Grex had just learned why species across the galaxy classified Earth as a death world, but for him, the lesson would be very brief. Colonel Bach crouched in the drop pod as it screamed through Thesara Prime's atmosphere at terminal velocity. Around him, 49 other human Marines checked their weapons and equipment one final time. The pod shook violently as atmospheric friction turned its outer hull cherry red, but Bach remained calm. He had done this hundreds of times before. What made this drop different was the reason for it. 2 minutes to impact, announced the pod's computer system. Enemy concentration detected at Landing Zone Alpha. Estimated 1,000 Korthak ground troops. Bach smiled grimly. Those were good odds for humans. The Marines had trained for exactly this kind of mission. Rapid assault on fortified positions held by numerically superior forces. The fact that the enemy had been murdering defenseless civilians just made the job more satisfying. "Listen up," he called to his squad over the communication system. "Intel reports indicate the Korthak have been using Villani civilians as hunting practice. That stops today. Rules of engagement are simple. Any Korthak with a weapon dies. Any Korthak threatening civilians dies. Any Korthak who doesn't surrender immediately dies. Questions?" "Just one, Colonel," replied Sergeant Yohn from the pod next to his. "What if they do surrender?" "Then we accept their surrender and process them according to the rules of war," Bach answered. "But, Sergeant, something tells me that won't be a problem." Above the planet's surface, the space battle was already over. It had lasted exactly 17 minutes from first shot to final explosion, and it hadn't been a battle so much as an extermination. The Korthak fleet had been caught completely off guard by the speed and ferocity of the human attack. Commander Nara pulled her fighter out of a victory roll as the last Korthak battleship broke apart in a shower of debris. Around her, hundreds of other human pilots were conducting sweep patterns, hunting for any surviving enemy vessels. "Blue Squadron, this is Blue Leader," she transmitted to her wingmen. "Sector 7 is clear. Moving to assist Gold Squadron with cleanup operations." The space battle had revealed something that surprised even the humans. The Korthak, despite their reputation as fierce warriors, had panicked when faced with an enemy that fought back with equal aggression. Their ships had broken formation within minutes, with individual captains trying to flee rather than maintain a coordinated defense. It turned out that the Korthak were excellent at bullying helpless victims, but they had no idea how to handle opponents who were better armed, better trained, and absolutely furious about murdered diplomats. "Nara," came Admiral Tay's voice over the command frequency. "Excellent work up there. Now get down to the surface and provide close air support for the ground assault. The Marines are about to find out what Korthak tastes like up close." "Roger." "That, Admiral. Blue Squadron, follow me down. Let's go hunting." On the ground, Colonel Bach's drop pod slammed into the surface of Thesara Prime with enough force to create a small crater. The impact would have killed most alien species, but humans had been designed by evolution to survive falls from significant heights. Bach was out of his pod and moving before the dust had settled. Around him, nearly 1 million human Marines were conducting simultaneous drops across the planet's surface. Each landing zone had been carefully selected to cut off Korthak escape routes and rescue trapped Volani civilians. "Squad Alpha, form up on me," Bach ordered as his men emerged from their pods. "Objective is the refugee camp 2 clicks north of here. Intel reports 500 Volani civilians being held for Korthak entertainment purposes." The phrase "entertainment purposes" made every human in the squad check their weapons with extra care. They had seen the recordings of what the Korthak considered entertaining. The advance across the alien landscape was swift and silent. Humans moved through terrain like ghosts, using cover and concealment techniques perfected over millions of years of hunting. The Korthak, who relied on intimidation and overwhelming force, never saw them coming. The first contact came when Bach's squad reached the perimeter of the Korthak camp. Through his scope, he could see massive alien warriors herding terrified Volani civilians into what appeared to be an arena. Several dead Volani lay scattered around the area, their bodies bearing claw marks that indicated they had been killed for sport. "Target-rich environment," whispered Sergeant Yoon over the communication. "Link, I count 20 Korthak guards, plus what looks like a command group near the arena." "Wait for my signal," Bach replied. "When we hit them all at once. I don't want any of these monsters escaping to hurt more civilians." The attack began with sniper fire. Human marksmen, positioned at multiple points around the camp, opened fire simultaneously. Korthak guards, who had been lounging in the alien sunlight, suddenly found themselves under assault from an enemy they couldn't see. But the real shock came when the Korthak tried to respond. They were used to fighting species that were physically weaker, slower, and less aggressive than themselves. Humans were none of those things. Colonel Bach emerged from cover like a force of nature, his squad following behind him in perfect coordination. The Korthak had size and strength advantages, but humans had speed, tactics, and a level of controlled fury that the aliens had never encountered. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, 23 Korthak warriors lay dead, and 500 Volani civilians were free. Not a single human had been seriously injured. "Objective secured," Bach reported to command. "Civilian casualties minimal, enemy casualties total." Similar reports were coming in from across the planet. Human forces were moving with a speed and efficiency that stunned both their alien allies and their alien enemies. Drop zones that should have taken hours to secure were falling in minutes. Captain Dong watched from orbit as his engineering teams prepared to deploy to the surface. The plan called for rapid construction of forward operating bases to support the ground assault, but at the rate the Marines were advancing, they might not need them. "Sir," his construction coordinator reported, "the Marines have secured 17 primary objectives ahead of schedule. They're requesting immediate medical and supply support for refugee operations." "Deploy all available teams," Dong ordered. "Priority goes to medical stations and refugee processing centers. These people have been through hell. Let's get them the help they need." Meanwhile, in the command center of what had been the Korthok planetary headquarters, General May was reviewing tactical displays with growing satisfaction. The enemy command structure had collapsed completely within the first hour of the assault. "General," her intelligence officer reported, "we've captured the Korthak field commander alive. He's requesting to speak with our leadership." "Put him through," May ordered. The holographic display activated, showing a massive Korthak warrior in restraints. Despite his situation, he still attempted to project authority and intimidation. "Human Commander," the alien began, "I am War Leader Drak of the Korthak Empire. I demand to know why you have attacked our rightful conquest. The Vellani are our property by right of conquest." General May studied the alien for a moment before responding. "War Leader Drak, I am General May of the Earth Defense Force. You are now a prisoner of war, and your invasion of this world is terminated." "You cannot simply end our conquest," Drak protested. "We are the strongest species in this sector. We take what we want." "We're the strongest," May corrected. "Past tense. Your fleet is destroyed. Your ground forces are dead or captured. Your empire's expansion has just hit a very large, very angry obstacle called humanity." Drak's confidence seemed to waver for the first time. "You cannot have defeated our entire expeditionary force so quickly. It is impossible." General May gestured to her tactical display, which showed the current status of Korthak forces across the planet. The display was almost entirely green, indicating human control. "War Leader, let me explain something about humans. We don't fight to conquer. We don't fight for sport. We fight to win, and we fight to protect the innocent. When you decided to use civilians for target practice, you made this personal." "But we are warriors," Drak said, confusion clear in his voice. "We are strong." "You were bullies," May replied coldly. "There's a difference, and now you're going to learn what happens when bullies pick on someone who hits back." Dr. Bin was already on the surface, setting up medical stations for the rescued Vellani civilians. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice the expressions on the aliens' faces as they watched human soldiers. There was gratitude, certainly, but also amazement. "Doctor," one of the Vellani refugees approached her timidly. "May I ask you something?" "Of course," Bin replied as she continued treating injured civilians. "Your warriors, they fight with such intensity. Yet when the battle was over, they immediately began helping our wounded. How is this possible?" Dr. Bin paused in her work to look at the alien. "Because that's what the strong do for the weak. We fight those who hurt you, and we heal you when you're injured. It's not complicated. But in our experience, strong species take what they want from weak species." "Then," Dr. Bin said with a gentle smile, "you haven't met humans before." Warlord Grek sat in a human detention cell, staring at the walls with a mixture of rage and confusion. The cell was clean, well-lit, and comfortable by most standards. He had been given medical attention for his injuries, adequate food, and even access to reading materials. By Korthak standards, he was being treated better than most of their own soldiers. This made no sense to him whatsoever. In the 3 days since his capture, Grex had watched human behavior with growing bewilderment. These creatures had destroyed his fleet with ruthless efficiency, killed thousands of Korthak warriors without mercy, and conquered an entire planet in less than 24 hours. They were clearly apex predators of the highest order. Yet they treated their prisoners according to strict codes of conduct. They provided medical care to wounded enemies. They had even established comfort stations for captured Korthak who were suffering from stress and fear. The door to his cell opened, and Admiral Tay entered with 2 guards. The human commander looked at him with those sharp predator eyes, but her expression was calm and professional. "Warlord Grex," she said, taking a seat across from him. "How are you being treated?" It was perhaps the most surreal question anyone had ever asked him. "You destroyed my fleet. You killed my warriors. You ended my conquest, and now you ask about my comfort." "You're a prisoner of war," Admiral Tay replied simply. Regardless of what you've done, you have rights under human law and galactic convention. Those rights will be respected. Grex leaned forward, his massive form dwarfing the human across from him. I ordered the execution of 3 million Vallani civilians. I used their children for target practice. I turned their cities into funeral pyres. And you give me medical care and comfortable quarters? Yes, Admiral Tay said without hesitation. Why? The question hung in the air between them for a long moment. Admiral Tay seemed to be considering how to explain something that was fundamental to human nature but apparently incomprehensible to the Korthak. Because, she said finally, how we treat our enemies says more about who we are than anything else. You acted like a monster. That doesn't mean we have to. Grex sat back, frustrated by the human's logic. Your species makes no sense. You fight like demons, then show mercy to those who would destroy you. How did such contradictory beings ever survive to reach the stars? Perhaps, Admiral Tay suggested, you should ask yourself why a species that fights like demons also protects the innocent. The two things aren't contradictory, they're connected. Meanwhile, in the medical stations across the Sara Prime, Dr. Bin and her teams were discovering the true extent of Korthak cruelty. The survivors they treated told stories of systematic brutality that went far beyond simple conquest. The Korthak had tortured and killed for entertainment, turned families into hunting games, and committed atrocities that had no military purpose whatsoever. Yet when wounded, Korthak prisoners were brought to her medical stations, Dr. Bin treated them with the same care she gave to Vallani civilians. Doctor, one of her assistants asked quietly, how can you help these creatures after what they've done? Dr. Bin looked up from the Korthak warrior she was treating for plasma burns. The alien was unconscious, but even in sleep his face showed the brutal aggression that had made his species feared across the galaxy. Because, she said, continuing her work, the moment we decide that some beings don't deserve medical care, we become what we're fighting against. We help them, because that's who we choose to be. The assistant watched as Dr. Bin carefully bandaged wounds that had been inflicted by human weapons. Even after seeing what they did to civilians? Especially after seeing what they did to civilians. The difference between us and them isn't that we're stronger or better armed. It's that we know when to stop. Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out. Human forces had established prisoner-of-war camps that provided better living conditions than most Korthak had experienced in their own military. Captured warriors were given proper nutrition, medical care, and even recreational activities while they awaited processing. General May toured one of the camps with the Korthak field commander, war leader Drak. The alien watched with visible confusion as human guards played recreational games with Korthak prisoners, teaching them sports from Earth and learning about Korthak culture in return. This is impossible, Drak muttered. Your warriors should be interrogating prisoners, not playing games with them. We already have all the intelligence we need, General May replied. Your soldiers aren't military secrets anymore. They're just beings who need food, shelter, and something to keep their minds occupied while we figure out what to do with them. What to do with us? Drak asked. That's still being decided. But I can tell you what we won't do. We won't torture you for information we don't need. We won't execute you for being our enemies. And we won't sell you into slavery or use you for labor. Drak stared at her. Then what is the point of conquest? What do you gain from defeating us? We gain the knowledge that the Vallani are safe, May said simply. That's all we wanted. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the camp entrance. A group of Vallani civilians had arrived asking to speak with the human commanders. Captain Hyun led the delegation, his large eyes bright with emotion. General May, Hyun said, bowing respectfully. My people have asked me to speak with you about the captured Korthak. What about them? May asked. We have seen how you treat them. With kindness and respect, despite what they did to us. We do not understand this. but we are grateful for it." General May looked puzzled. "Grateful? Why?" "Because," Hyun said quietly, "watching how you treat your enemies has taught us something about who you are as a people. Any species can be cruel to their foes. Only truly civilized beings can show mercy to those who showed them none." War leader Drac listened to this exchange with growing bewilderment. In his understanding of the galaxy, the strong dominated the weak, period. The idea that strength could be used to protect rather than exploit was completely foreign to him. "Human commander," he said to General May, "your people confuse me. You have the power to do anything you want to us. You could torture us, kill us, enslave us, yet you choose to treat us with dignity. Why?" May turned to face the massive Korthok. "Warrior." "Because that's what civilization means, war leader. It's not about having the power to hurt others. It's about having the power to hurt others and choosing not to. But we are your enemies. We killed your diplomats. We slaughtered innocents. Yes, you did. And you'll face justice for those crimes. But justice isn't the same thing as revenge, and punishment isn't the same thing as cruelty." Admiral Tay received daily reports about the prisoner operations, and each one reinforced her belief that humanity was handling the situation correctly. The Korthak prisoners were being processed, according to galactic law, with trials scheduled for those accused of war crimes. The proceedings would be fair, thorough, and conducted with full legal representation for the accused. It was, in many ways, more justice than the Korthak had ever shown their own victims. "Admiral," Commander Sue reported during their daily briefing, "we're receiving communications from other Korthak-controlled systems. Word of our victory here has spread, and several subject species are requesting assistance." "What's our response capability?" Tay asked. "Limited at the moment, but if we redeploy the fleet, we could assist 3 or 4 other systems currently under Korthak occupation." Admiral Tay considered this. "Draft a response plan. But first I want to make sure we've fully secured Thesara Prime and established proper governance. We're not going to liberate one world just to abandon it to chaos." Dr. Hana, who had been observing the cultural exchange between humans and both Volani and Korthak, provided an analysis that would prove prophetic. "Admiral," she said, "I believe we're witnessing the beginning of a fundamental shift in galactic politics. The Korthak built their empire on the assumption that might makes right, and that the strong naturally prey upon the weak. Our intervention has shattered that assumption." "How so?" "Because we've demonstrated that the strongest species in the region, us, chooses to protect the weak rather than exploit them. That changes everything. Other species are going to have to reconsider their basic assumptions about how power works in the galaxy." As if to prove her point, Captain Hyun approached with a formal request from the Volani Council. "Admiral Tay," he said, "my people have authorized me to make an official proposal. We would like to invite humanity to establish a permanent presence in our system. Not as conquerors or occupiers, but as guardians." "What exactly are you proposing?" Tay asked. "A mutual defense agreement. We provide you with bases, supplies, and whatever support we can offer. In return, you help us defend against future threats and assist other peaceful species who face similar dangers." Admiral Tay smiled. "Captain Hyun, I think you've just described the beginning of something much larger than either of us initially intended. And indeed, as word of humanity's intervention spread across the galaxy, it became clear that the rescue of Thesara Prime was just the first chapter in a much longer story about what happened when the galaxy's most dangerous predators decided to become its most dedicated protectors." Ambassador Yun stood before the assembled representatives of 47 different species in the Great Hall of the Galactic Trade Confederation. The massive chamber buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages as diplomats, military leaders, and trade officials discussed the implications of what was being called the Thesara incident. 3 months had passed since humanity's intervention in the Korthak-Vallani conflict, and the shockwaves were still spreading across known space. The swift destruction of the Korthak fleet had sent a clear message to every aggressive empire in the galaxy. There was a new apex predator in the neighborhood, and it had very different rules about who was allowed to hurt whom. "Honored delegates," Yun began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "I come before you today to propose the establishment of the Terran Protection Accords, a formal framework for humanitarian intervention and mutual defense among peaceful species." A murmur ran through the assembly. The concept was unprecedented in galactic politics. Military alliances existed, certainly, but they were typically formed between species of similar power levels for mutual benefit. The idea of a strong species voluntarily protecting weaker ones without demanding tribute or territory was almost incomprehensible. Delegate Vex of the Altaran Federation raised a tentacle to speak. "Ambassador Yun, while we appreciate humanity's assistance to the Vallani, we must ask the obvious question: what does Earth gain from these arrangements? Surely you do not expect us to believe that humans would risk their lives and resources for strangers out of simple altruism." Yun had been expecting this question. It was the same one every species asked when they first encountered human protective instincts. "Delegate Vex, let me answer your question with a question of my own. What does a parent gain by protecting their children? What does a pack leader gain by defending the weak members of their group? Some behaviors exist not because they provide immediate material benefit, but because they define who we choose to be." The Altaran delegate's translation device struggled with the concept. In their language, there was no word for altruism that didn't also imply stupidity. Captain Hyun, now serving as the Vallani ambassador to the Confederation, stood to address the assembly. In the months since the liberation of his homeworld, he had become one of humanity's most vocal advocates. "Honored delegates," Hyun said, "I have had the privilege of observing human behavior both in war and in peace. I can testify that their actions match their words. They came to our aid asking for nothing in return. They defeated our enemies, and then treated those enemies with more mercy than the Korthak had ever shown us. They rebuilt our cities, healed our wounded, and asked only for our friendship in return." Delegate Quen of the Zephyrian Commonwealth, a species known for their cautious pragmatism, raised a concern that many were thinking. "Captain Hyun, your gratitude is understandable, but we must consider the broader implications. If humanity establishes itself as the galaxy's protector, what happens when they decide that protection requires control? History shows us that guardians often become rulers." Ambassador Yun nodded respectfully. "Delegate Quen, your concern is valid and we take it seriously. That's why the Terran Protection Accords include specific provisions limiting human authority. We propose to act only when invited by legitimate governments facing external aggression. We will not interfere in internal affairs, and we will withdraw our forces when the threat is eliminated." "And if we choose not to invite your protection?" asked Delegate Kex of the Rigelian Empire. "Then we respect your decision completely," Yun replied. "The accords are voluntary. No species will be forced to accept human protection, and no species will be penalized for refusing it." The debate continued for hours, but the real decision had already been made in the smaller meetings and private conversations that preceded the formal session. Word of the Thessera intervention had spread throughout the galaxy, and with it had come a flood of requests for assistance. The gentle folk of Andromeda Minor were facing raids from the aggressive Skull Hunters. The Crystal Singers of Harmony, IV, were being systematically enslaved by the Obsidian Cartel. The peaceful farmers of New Eden were watching their children disappear into the slave markets of the Serpent Empire. For the first time in galactic history, the weak had somewhere to turn for help. Dr. Hana, observing the proceedings from the gallery, marveled at the change in galactic politics. Just a few months ago, these same delegates had been discussing trade routes and mining rights. Now they were debating the fundamental nature of power and responsibility in civilization. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than humanity had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. 28 species voted to join the Terran Protection Accords. 15 voted against, mostly the more aggressive civilizations who preferred the old system where might made right. 4 abstained, choosing to wait and see how the new arrangement worked in practice. But the real impact became clear in the days following the vote, as reports began arriving from across the galaxy. Admiral Tay reviewed the intelligence summary with a mixture of pride and concern. "Commander Sue, what's our current situation?" 17 different species have requested immediate military assistance, Sue reported. The requests range from simple anti-piracy operations to full-scale interventions against invading empires. We've also received 43 requests for humanitarian aid and disaster relief. Our response capability? Stretched, but manageable if we're strategic about it. The Third Fleet can handle the Andromeda Minor situation. The Fifth Fleet is already en route to assist the Crystal Singers. For the larger operations, we'll need to coordinate with our new allies. The new allies were perhaps the most surprising development of all. Species that had previously been neutral or even hostile to each other were now cooperating under the human protection umbrella. The gentle Villani were sharing their advanced medical technology with former enemies. The warlike Alterans were providing military intelligence to species they had once considered beneath their notice. It turned out that when survival was at stake, old prejudices became less important than common cause. Captain Dong was experiencing this firsthand as he supervised the construction of the first joint species military base in galactic history. Human engineers worked alongside Alteran weapon specialists and Villani medical experts to create a facility that could serve as a rapid response center for the entire sector. The logistics are complicated, he reported to Admiral Tay, but the cooperation is remarkable. These species have been suspicious of each other for centuries, but they're working together like they've been allies forever. What changed? Tay asked. They realized they have a common interest in not being conquered, enslaved, or exterminated, Dong replied. Turns out that's a pretty strong motivator for cooperation. The psychological impact on aggressive species was equally dramatic. The Skull Hunters, who had been raiding peaceful worlds for generations, suddenly found themselves facing not just local defense forces, but the possibility of human intervention. Several pirate organizations had already disbanded rather than risk drawing Earth's attention. The Obsidian Cartel, which had built an empire on slave labor, was discovering that their merchandise now had powerful friends. 3 major slave trading operations had been shut down by human task forces, and several more had ceased operations voluntarily. General May, now commanding the new Galactic Humanitarian Response Force, found herself dealing with requests that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "General," her aide reported, "we're receiving a surrender request from the Crimson Brotherhood. They're offering to release all their prisoners and abandon their territorial claims in exchange for amnesty." "What's their record?" May asked. 47 systems under their control, approximately 12 million enslaved beings, responsible for at least 20 planetary bombardments. May considered this. "Counter-offer. They release all prisoners immediately, provide full reparations to their victims, and submit to war crimes trials. In exchange, we guarantee fair legal proceedings and humane treatment." "Sir, they're in no position to negotiate. They could just surrender unconditionally." "Yes, but if we treat them fairly, when they come to us voluntarily, other criminal organizations might be more willing to surrender rather than fight to the death. Sometimes being generous with your enemies is the most practical strategy." The philosophical implications were not lost on the galaxy's intellectuals and political theorists. Dr. Hannah found herself in constant demand as a speaker and consultant as species tried to understand the new paradigm. The traditional model of galactic politics was based on predator-prey relationships, she explained to a gathering of xenobiologists and political scientists. Strong species dominated weak ones, either through direct conquest or economic exploitation. The weak survived by being useful to the strong, or by hiding from them. But humans have introduced a third option, added Dr. Zinn, a Volani political theorist who had become one of the leading experts on human behavior. The strong can choose to protect the weak. This creates a completely different dynamic. Captain Hyun stood in the golden fields of Thessera Prime, watching human and Volani children play together under the warm afternoon sun. 6 months had passed since the liberation, and the sight still filled him with wonder. Volani younglings, with their large dark eyes and gentle nature, chased human children who laughed with the fearless joy of their species. Predator and prey, evolved on worlds separated by thousands of light years, had become friends. The playground had been built by Captain Dong's engineering corps as part of the reconstruction effort. It incorporated Volani artistic sensibilities, with human safety standards, creating something beautiful and functional that neither species could have achieved alone. It was, Hyun thought, a perfect symbol of what their alliance had become. "Captain," came a familiar voice behind him. He turned to see Dr. Hana approaching with a data pad in her hands and a smile on her face. "I have the final reconstruction. Reports. Good news, I hope? Better than good. Agricultural production is now 20% above pre-invasion levels. The new medical centers are serving not just Volani but refugees from 7 other systems. And our joint research programs have produced 3 major scientific breakthroughs in the past month alone." Hyun shook his head in amazement. "When we sent that first transmission asking for help, we never imagined it would lead to this." "What did you imagine?" Dr. Hana asked, genuinely curious. "Honestly, we hoped that someone might send a few ships to evacuate our leadership, maybe establish a refugee camp on some distant world where our children could grow up safely. We never dreamed that anyone would actually fight to save our entire civilization." "That's the difference between humans and most other species," Dr. Hana explained. "When we see a problem, we don't ask how little we can do to help. We ask how much we can do to fix it completely." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a hover transport carrying Admiral Tay and her senior staff. The Admiral stepped out and looked around the thriving community with obvious satisfaction. "Captain Hyun, Dr. Hana," she greeted them. "How are our joint operations proceeding?" "Excellently, Admiral," Hyun replied. "The Volani Council has just approved the expansion of the human base by another 30%. We're also prepared to contribute our entire medical database to the Galactic Health Initiative." Admiral Tay nodded approvingly. "That's generous of your people. Those medical advances will save lives across the galaxy." "It is the least we can do," Hyun said. "You saved our entire species. Sharing our knowledge seems like a small gesture in comparison." "Captain," Admiral Tay said seriously, "you need to understand something. You don't owe us anything. What we did because it was right, not because we expected payment." It was a conversation they had had before. But Hyun still struggled with the concept. In his understanding of galactic politics, everything had a price. The idea that humans would risk their lives for strangers without expecting compensation was still difficult for him to accept, even after months of evidence. Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent communication from Admiral Tay's flagship. Commander Su's face appeared on the portable holographic display, her expression serious but not alarmed. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Outer Rim. Another distress call, similar to the original Volani message." "Details," Admiral Tay ordered. "A species calling themselves the Harmony Collective. Their homeworld is under attack by the Iron Claw Empire. They're requesting immediate assistance under the terms of the Protection Accords." Admiral Tay and Dr. Hana exchanged glances. This was exactly what they had been preparing for, the first major test of the new galactic order they had helped create. "Admiral," Hyun said quietly, "you're going to help them, aren't you?" "Of course," Admiral Tay replied without hesitation. "That's what we do." Within hours, the now familiar pattern began to repeat itself. Ships that had been on patrol or conducting humanitarian missions received recall orders. The massive human war machine that had become the galaxy's guarantee of peace began moving toward another crisis. But this time, they weren't alone. Captain Hyun stood on the bridge of the Vellani hospital ship Gentle Healer as it prepared to join the human fleet. Around him, his medical staff prepared equipment and supplies for what would be their first combat deployment. They were terrified, but they were also determined. "Captain," his communication officer reported, "we're receiving departure clearance from the human command ship." "Acknowledge," Hyun ordered. "Signal Admiral Tay that the Vellani Humanitarian Corps is ready to assist." On the flagship Soul's Fury, Admiral Tay watched as her fleet assembled for departure. But unlike the original intervention at Thesara Prime, this fleet included ships from a dozen different species: Vellani hospital ships, Alteran escort frigates, crystalline supply vessels, even a few converted civilian ships crewed by volunteers from neutral species who wanted to help. "Admiral," Commander Su reported, "all Allied vessels report ready for departure. Total fleet strength: 5,200 ships representing 16 different species." Admiral Tay smiled. The fleet was actually larger than the original force that had liberated Thesara Prime, but now it represented something far more significant than human military power. It represented a new kind of civilization. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Prepare for hyperspace jump." The departure from Thesara Prime was witnessed by thousands of beings from dozens of species. As the massive fleet disappeared into hyperspace, their destination another world in need of salvation, the observers understood that they were witnessing history in the making. Dr. Bin, now serving as the chief medical officer for the Joint Fleet, reviewed casualty projections with her mixed species staff. The Iron Claw Empire was reportedly even more brutal than the Korthak had been, but the Alliance fleet was better prepared and better coordinated than any force in galactic history. "Doctor," her Alteran assistant asked, "why do you think the humans agreed to let other species join their military operations? Wouldn't it be easier to handle these situations alone?" Dr. Bin considered the question as she checked medical supplies. "Because this was never about humans proving they're the strongest species in the galaxy. It's about building a galaxy where the strong protect the weak. If only humans do the protecting, then we haven't really changed anything. We've just replaced one dominant species with another. But surely the humans could accomplish these missions more efficiently without coordinating with other species." "Efficiency isn't always the most important goal," Dr. Bin replied. "Sometimes building trust and cooperation is more valuable than speed. Every species that participates in these missions becomes more invested in the new galactic order. They stop being passive beneficiaries and become active participants. The hyperspace journey to the Harmony Collective's homeworld took 18 hours. During that time, the various species' crews worked together, shared knowledge, and prepared for what lay ahead. Human tactical officers briefed Alteran gunners on target prioritization. Vellani medical teams trained with human marines on battlefield triage. Crystalline engineers showed human technicians how to optimize power distribution systems. When the fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Harmony system, they found a situation that was both familiar and different from the Thesara intervention. The Iron Claw Empire had indeed invaded the peaceful Harmony Collective, but they had learned from the Korthak's mistake. Instead of simply overwhelming the defenders with brute force, they had taken hostages and were threatening to execute civilian populations if any outside force intervened. "Admiral," Commander Su reported, "the Iron Claw commander is demanding to speak with our leadership. He claims to have 2 million Harmony civilians as hostages." "Put him through," Admiral Tay ordered. The holographic display activated, showing a massive armored figure that resembled a cross between a spider and a tank. General Crack of the Ironclaw Empire had clearly studied the reports from Thessera Prime and believed he had found a weakness in human psychology. "Human Admiral," Crack began, in a voice like grinding metal, "I am General Crack of the Ironclaw Empire. I have studied your species' unfortunate tendency to value civilian lives over military objectives. I therefore inform you that I have 2 million Harmony civilians under my direct control. Any attempt to interfere with our conquest will result in their immediate execution." Admiral Tay listened to this ultimatum with a perfectly calm expression. When the Iron-Claw General finished speaking, she responded with a slight smile that somehow managed to be more terrifying than any threat. "General Crack," she said pleasantly, "thank you for the information. I'm Admiral Tay of the United Earth Defense Fleet, and I have some information for you as well. You are surrounded by 5,000 ships crewed by beings who are very upset about your hostage situation. You have exactly 1 hour to release all civilian prisoners and surrender your forces. If you refuse, we will remove you from the equation in whatever manner seems most efficient." "You cannot attack while I hold hostages," Crack protested. "Your human psychology prevents you from risking innocent lives." "General," Admiral Tay replied, "you're absolutely right. We won't risk innocent lives. That's why we're going to save them first, and then deal with you."